The iron gates of the Nightbourne estate loomed before Sarah like the entrance to another world, one she'd only heard whispered about in cautionary tales told to keep children obedient. The autumn rain had soaked through her thin jacket, and she clutched her daughter Emma closer, feeling the 4-year-old's small body trembling against her chest. Whether from cold or fear, Sarah couldn't tell. Perhaps both. "Mama, where are we going?" Emma's voice was barely audible over the storm. Sarah couldn't answer. The words stuck in her throat like shards of glass. How could she explain to her daughter that her own grandfather, Emma's great-grandfather, had bartered them away like livestock to settle a debt? That the imposing mansion before them belonged to creatures that shouldn't exist, led by an alpha whose very name made grown men blanch? The car door slammed behind her. Her father's driver had already returned to the vehicle, unwilling to linger a moment longer than necessary. The red taillights disappeared down the winding drive, and Sarah had never felt more abandoned in her life. "We're going to meet someone," Sarah finally managed, adjusting Emma's pink rain hood. "Someone who's going to let us stay with him for a while." It was a pitiful explanation, but what else could she say? That her father, the illustrious Richard Ashford, had borrowed extensively from the vampire covens to fund his failing business empire? That way he couldn't repay. The alpha vampire had demanded an unusual form of collateral, Richard's widowed daughter and granddaughter, to serve in his household. The punishment was cruel in its precision. Her father had never approved of her marriage to Michael, a man he deemed beneath their family status. When Michael died in a car accident 2 years ago, her father had made it clear that Sarah's return home was an act of charity, not love. Now, facing financial ruin and supernatural retribution, he'd found the perfect solution: sacrifice the daughter he'd never wanted back anyway. The massive front door opened before Sarah could knock. A woman stood framed in golden light, tall, elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into an immaculate bun. Her eyes, an unusual amber color, assessed Sarah and Emma with an expression that wasn't quite welcoming but wasn't hostile either. "Sarah Ashford and child," the woman stated rather than asked. "I am Mrs. Thorne, this state manager. You're expected. Come in from the rain." The interior of Nightbourne Manor was nothing like Sarah had imagined. She'd pictured something from a Gothic novel, dark, draped in velvet and shadow. Instead, the foyer was surprisingly bright, with cream-colored walls and warm-wood floors. A grand staircase curved upward, and she could see doorways leading to various rooms, all well-lit and tastefully decorated. "The alpha is in his study," Mrs. Thorne said, helping Emma out of her wet coat with surprising gentleness. "He'll meet with you shortly. First, let's get you both warm and dry." She led them through a maze of corridors to a guest suite that was larger than Sarah's entire apartment had been. 2 bedrooms connected by a sitting room, with an ensuite bathroom that gleamed with marble and brass fixtures. "Your belongings will arrive tomorrow," Mrs. Thorne informed her. The few boxes Sarah had been permitted to pack. "I'll have some clothes sent up for now, and dinner will be ready within the hour. The alpha requests your presence afterward. My daughter will be cared for. I raised 5 children of my own, Mrs. Ashford. The little one will be safe." After Mrs. Thorne departed, Sarah helped Emma into a warm bath, the child's questions becoming more insistent. "Is this a castle, Mama?" "Something like that." "Are there princes here?" Sarah's laugh was hollow. "Not exactly, sweetheart." "Then what?" "People who are different." Emma seemed to accept this, as children often do, finding wonder where adults found only dread. By the time she was dried and dressed in the soft pajamas that had materialized on the bed, she was chattering about the pretty house and asking if there might be other children to play with. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Thorne had returned, this time with a tray of soup, bread, and fruit. "Eat something," she said to Sarah, her tone gentler than before. "You look half-starved. The alpha doesn't tolerate neglect of health in his household, and you'll need your strength." "For what?" Sarah asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Thorne's expression was unreadable. "For whatever comes. This is not the prison you imagine it to be, girl, but it's not freedom either. You'll learn the difference soon enough." After Emma had eaten and been tucked into the smaller bedroom, still chattering sleepily about their adventure, Sarah forced herself to eat despite her churning stomach. She changed into the simple black dress that had been provided, appropriate for a servant, she supposed, and tried to tame her damp blonde hair into something presentable. The knock came at exactly 8 o'clock. Mrs. Thorne once again, her face as composed as carved stone. The Alpha will see you now. The walk to his study felt interminable. Sarah's mind raced with everything she'd heard about vampire alphas, that they were ancient, powerful, capable of tearing through human flesh like paper, that they viewed humans as little more than cattle, useful only for blood and labor. That crossing one meant death. If you were lucky, if you weren't lucky, it meant something far worse. Mrs. Thorne knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting for a response. Mrs. Sarah Ashford, Alpha. The study was dimly lit, dominated by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive desk. Behind it sat a man who made Sarah's breath catch despite her terror. He wasn't what she expected. Alpha Dominic Nightborn rose from his chair with fluid grace, and Sarah's first thought was that he looked too young to be the centuries-old creature of legend. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair that touched his collar and features that were striking rather than conventionally handsome. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that seemed carved for either cruelty or kindness. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were gray, the color of storm clouds, and far too knowing. Mrs. Ashford. His voice was deep, cultured, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Please sit. It wasn't a request. Sarah lowered herself into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her hands clasped tight in her lap to stop them from shaking. He remained standing for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to meet his gaze. If she was to survive here, she couldn't show weakness, not more than she already had. I suppose you know why you're here, he said finally, returning to his own chair. My father's debts. Indeed, Richard Ashford borrowed considerably from my coven. When he proved unable to repay, we negotiated alternative terms. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. I'm curious, Mrs. Ashford, did your father give you any choice in this arrangement? The question surprised her. Does it matter? Perhaps not legally, but I find it matters in other ways. Sarah swallowed hard. He gave me no choice. He said I owed him for taking me back after my husband died, that this was how I'd repay him. Dominic was silent for a long moment. Your husband. The accident was 2 years ago. Yes. And your daughter? Emma, I believe Mrs. Thorne said. Hearing Emma's name from this creature's lips made Sarah's maternal instincts flare. She's 4 years old. She's innocent in all this. Whatever you require of me, please. She's just a child. Peace, Mrs. Ashford. He held up one hand, and Sarah noticed how elegant his fingers were, though she suspected that same hand could crush her skull without effort. I have no designs on your daughter. Children are precious and should be protected, not used as pawns. Unlike your father, I have standards. The contempt in his voice when he mentioned her father was palpable. Sarah found herself caught between relief and confusion. Then what do you want from us? From Emma? Nothing. She'll live here as any child would, safely, comfortably, with access to education and care. He leaned back in his chair. From you, I require something more complex. Sarah's heart hammered. Here it came, the true terms of her servitude. Your father's debt cannot be settled with mere money. Not anymore. He insulted this coven's honor, made promises he had no intention of keeping, and endangered the secrecy we've maintained for centuries with his careless business dealings. The debt requires restitution of a more personal nature. What kind of restitution? You'll serve as part of my household, not as a servant. I have sufficient staff, but as something more visible, a symbol, if you will, that I've claimed what's owed. You'll attend coven functions at my side, act as hostess when required, and generally make it clear that the Ashford family has been brought to heel. Sarah's mind reeled. You want me to pretend to be your... What? Your companion. Something like that. The specifics can be flexible, but the appearance must be maintained. Your father bartered you as collateral. I'm simply collecting in a way that serves both revenge and practicality. And if I refuse? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. You won't. It wasn't a threat, exactly. More a statement of absolute fact. Sarah understood with perfect clarity that refusal wasn't truly an option, not if she wanted to keep Emma safe. How long? She asked quietly. Until I decide the debt is paid. Years, most likely. Perhaps longer. Years. Sarah felt the walls closing in. Years of living as his vampire's trophy, paraded around as proof of her father's failure. Years of Emma growing up in this strange world. But alive. They'd both be alive. I have conditions, Sarah said, surprising herself with her own boldness. Dominic's eyebrow arched. Do you? Emma's safety and well-being are non-negotiable. She receives proper education, medical care, and she's never be exposed to whatever violence this world entails. And she must never know the real reason we're here. I won't have her burdened with that shame. Agreed. Sarah blinked. Just like that. Just like that. As I said, I have no quarrel with children. Your daughter will be protected under this roof, as if she were my own blood. You have my word on that, Mrs. Ashford, and a vampire's word is not given lightly. There was something in his tone that made Sarah believe him, which was perhaps the most unsettling thing of all. This creature, this alpha who could supposedly kill without remorse, seemed genuinely sincere about Emma's welfare. Is there anything else you wish to know? Dominic asked. 1,000 questions crowded Sarah's mind, but only one came out. Why agree to my conditions so easily? You hold all the power here. For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, making him look almost human. Almost. Because power without honor is worthless, and I'm not the monster your father's stories likely painted me to be. You're here because of his choices, not yours. The least I can do is ensure those choices don't destroy an innocent woman and her child. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. This wasn't how she'd imagined this conversation going. She prepared herself for cruelty, for degradation, for casual evil, not for reasonableness wrapped in dark elegance. You may go, Dominic said, returning his attention to the papers on his desk. Mrs. Thorne will help you settle in tomorrow. We have a coven gathering next week. You'll attend with me. She'll ensure you have appropriate attire. Sarah rose on unsteady legs, making it halfway to the door before his voice stopped her. Mrs. Ashford? She turned. Welcome to Nightbourne Manor. I hope, in time, you'll find it less of a prison than you fear. The word should have been comforting. Instead, they left Sarah more confused than ever. The days that followed established an unsettling routine. Emma adapted with the resilience of childhood, delighted by the manor's grounds and the patient attention of Mrs. Thorne, who seemed to have a genuine fondness for children despite her stern demeanor. Sarah learned that several members of the household staff had children who occasionally visited, and Emma was soon playing with them under careful supervision. Sarah's own duties were less clear. She was given a run of the manor, with only certain wings declared off-limits. Mrs. Thorne explained these housed the Alpha's private quarters and certain rooms used for coven business that humans were better off not seeing. Not because you'd be harmed, the older woman explained, but because some knowledge is a burden you don't need. Sarah spent her time learning the layout of the vast estate, reading in the extensive library, and trying to prepare herself for the coven gathering. Mrs. Thorne had taken her measurements for a dress, and Sarah dreaded seeing whatever elaborate costume she'd be expected to wear. She saw Dominic infrequently. He kept to himself mostly, emerging from the study only for the occasional meal or to walk the ground at night. When they did cross paths, he was unfailingly polite but distant, as though she were just another piece of furniture he'd acquired. It should have been a relief. Instead, Sarah found herself increasingly curious about him. The other household members, all vampires, she'd learned, treated her with a mixture of caution and sympathy. There was Marcus, Dominic's second in command, a sandy-haired vampire with an easy smile who seemed to find the entire situation amusing. Elena, a fierce woman who served as head of security, and several others whose names Sarah was still learning. They weren't the monsters she'd imagined. They laughed, argued, showed concern for one another. It was disorienting. You're puzzled by us, Marcus observed one afternoon, finding Sarah in the library. You expected us to be more monstrous? Sarah didn't see the point in lying. Yes. He settled into a chair across from her with a grin. We can be when the situation calls for it. But mostly we're just people who happen to need blood to survive. We think, we build lives that span centuries. We're not that different from you, except for the immortality and supernatural strength and occasional need to tear out throats. That last part seems fairly significant, Sarah said dryly. Fair point. Marcus studied her with interest. You're handling this better than most would, Dominic noticed. He expected you to be broken by now, or at least thoroughly cowed. My daughter needs me to be strong. Ah, yes, the little one. She's charming, already as Mrs. Thorne wrapped around her finger. He paused. Dominic has a soft spot for children. Lost someone very young, centuries ago. He doesn't speak of it, but it's why he reacted so strongly to your father's treatment of you and Emma. Sarah wasn't sure what to do with this information. He knew my father would use us as collateral? He suspected. Your father is predictable in his selfishness. Dominic structured the debt deliberately to force Richard's hand, to expose him for what he is. Then I'm just a pawn in his revenge. Are you? Marcus tilted his head. Or are you and Emma perhaps better off here than you were under your father's roof? Dominic has many faults, but he protects what's his. And whether you like it or not, you're both under his protection now. The question haunted Sarah over the following days. Had she been better off in her father's house, walking on eggshells, constantly reminded of her failure to marry well? Or was there something like safety in this strange new world? The night of the coven gathering arrived with appalling speed. Mrs. Thorne helped Sarah into the dress, and she had to admit it was beautiful. Deep blue silk that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated, with a neckline that was modest without being matronly. Her blonde hair was swept up, held in place with silver pins. You look lovely, Mrs. Thorne said approvingly. Remember, stay near the alpha. Speak only when spoken to, and don't accept any private invitations from other vampires. You're under Dominic's protection, but some may test those boundaries. Sarah's stomach churned. They'll know I'm human? Of course. That's rather the point. You're a statement. That the alpha claims what's owed, that he's powerful enough to keep you safe despite your vulnerability. It's all very political. Emma was already asleep, watched over by Mrs. Thorne's niece. Sarah had checked on her 3 times, each time finding her daughter peaceful, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. At least one of them could sleep easily. Dominic was waiting at the bottom of the grand staircase. He wore a black suit that looked tailored to perfection, and when he looked up at her descent, something flickered across his face too quickly for her to identify. You look well, he said simply. Thank you. Sarah accepted his offered arm. Try not to notice how solid it felt beneath her fingers, how easily he could snap her in half. I'm nervous. That's wise, but you'll be safe. No one would dare harm you in my presence. The gathering was held in the Manor's ballroom, a space Sarah hadn't seen before. It was stunning, all crystal chandeliers and polished wood floors, with tall windows looking out over moonlit gardens. At least 50 vampires were already present, conversing in small groups, their voices a low murmur. Every head turned when Sarah and Dominic entered. The attention was overwhelming. Sarah felt every eye assessing her, weighing her worth, wondering at her purpose. Dominic's hand covered hers on his arm, a subtle gesture of either reassurance or ownership. Dominic. A woman's voice called out. She approached with the grace of a predator, beautiful, dark-haired, wearing red silk like armor. So the rumors are true. You've taken a pet. Careful, Vivian. Dominic's voice held a warning. Mrs. Ashford is under my protection. Of course, of course. Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes as she studied Sarah. Pretty thing. I suppose she's payment for the Ashford debts. Among other things. How? Traditional of you. I didn't think you had it in you anymore, Dom. Not after. That will be all, Vivian. The other vampire drifted away. But the damage was done. Sarah felt the weight of speculation around her, heard the whispered conversations. She was a curiosity, a scandal, a symbol of something she didn't fully understand. Dominic guided her through the crowd, introducing her to various coven members. Most were polite but distant. A few seemed genuinely friendly, and some looked at her with something that made her skin crawl, a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. "Stay close," Dominic murmured as they moved toward the refreshment table. "And if anyone makes you uncomfortable, tell me immediately. Why do you care?" The question escaped before Sarah could stop it. "If I'm just a symbol of my father's debt, you're not just anything." His gray eyes met hers, and for a moment, Sarah forgot to breathe. "You're under my protection, which means your well-being reflects on my honor. Beyond that," he paused, "you've shown remarkable strength these past weeks. You care for your daughter. You haven't fallen apart despite your circumstances, and you treat my household with respect rather than fear. These things matter to me." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus appeared at Dominic's elbow. "Hate to interrupt, but we have a situation developing. Council members are asking questions about the Ashford arrangement." Dominic's expression hardened. "I'll handle it. Mrs. Ashford, would you excuse me?" "Marcus will stay with you." He was gone before she could answer, disappearing into a side room with several stern-looking vampires. Marcus offered her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. Dominic expected this. Some of the older vampires think he's going soft, using you as a companion rather than, well, something more traditional." "What would be more traditional?" Marcus hesitated. "You don't want to know. Trust me on that." But Sarah could imagine. Blood slave, kept animal. All the dark possibilities her mind had conjured when she first arrived. The fact that Dominic had chosen a different path suddenly seemed significant in ways she was only beginning to understand. The evening dragged on. Sarah made polite conversation with vampires who ranged from coolly cordial to subtly threatening. She sipped wine she didn't taste and smiled until her face ached. Through it all, she was aware of Dominic's absence, the way certain vampires kept glancing toward the room where he'd disappeared. When he finally emerged, his expression was thunderous. He crossed the ballroom directly to Sarah, and something in his bearing made the crowd part like water. "We're leaving," he said quietly. Marcus frowned. "Already? Dom, if you leave now, I've made my position clear. Those who have a problem with it can take it up with me directly. Come, Mrs. Ashford." Sarah didn't argue. Whatever had happened in that room had left Dominic barely containing rage, and she had no desire to be near him if that control snapped. They walked in silence through empty corridors until they reached a terrace overlooking the gardens. Dominic stopped at the railing, gripping it so hard Sarah heard stone crack. She should have been terrified. Instead, she found herself asking what happened. "They questioned my judgment, suggested I was dishonoring coven tradition by not treating you as property to be used." His voice was tight. "They implied I was weak for showing you any consideration at all. And—" He turned to face her, and Sarah saw something raw in his expression. "And I told them that any vampire who touches you answers to me personally, that you and your daughter are under my absolute protection, and I will enforce that protection with whatever force necessary." I may have elaborated on what that force would entail. Despite herself, Sarah smiled slightly. I'm guessing it was graphic. Exceptionally. Some of the tension left his shoulders. "I won't let them hurt you, Sarah. That's not why you're here." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Why am I here, really?" she asked softly. "It's not just about my father's debt, is it?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the moonlit gardens. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 200 years ago, I had a family, a wife, a daughter. I was turned against my will, and when I returned to them, I couldn't control the hunger. I killed them both." He continued before Sarah could respond. "I've spent 2 centuries building this coven, maintaining control, proving I'm more than the monster I became that night. When your father offered you and Emma as collateral, I saw a chance to do something I've never done before." "What?" "Protect someone vulnerable instead of destroying them. Give a child the safety my daughter never had. Perhaps prove to myself that I can be more than my worst moment." He finally looked at her. You and Emma represent something I thought I'd lost forever, the possibility of redemption. Sarah's throat tightened. This powerful, dangerous creature before her was carrying centuries of guilt, and somehow she and Emma had become tangled up in his attempt to atone for it. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for what happened to your family. It was a long time ago. That doesn't mean it stops hurting." His eyes met hers, and Sarah saw a surprise there, followed by something that might have been gratitude. "No, it doesn't." They stood in silence, the night air cool around them. Sarah knew she should be afraid. She was alone with a vampire who just admitted to killing his own family. But somehow, she felt safer than she had in months. "Thank you," she said finally, "for protecting Emma, for not being the monster you could be." "The night is young," Dominic said, but there was a hint of dark humor in his voice. "Give it time." As weeks turned into months, something shifted between Sarah and Dominic. They began sharing meals, at first by accident and then by design. He showed her the parts of the manor she hadn't seen, including his private library with books dating back centuries. She told him about her life before, about Michael and the too brief happiness they'd shared, about the slow suffocation of living under her father's roof. Emma blossomed in the manor's care. She attended a small private school in the nearby town, driven there each day by Marcus, who'd appointed himself her unofficial guardian. She spoke of her new friends, her teachers, the playground. She never asked when they would leave, and Sarah didn't know if that was blessing or curse. "She's happy here," Dominic observed one evening. He and Sarah were in his study, a habit that had formed without either quite acknowledging it. He was supposedly working through correspondence while she read, but they spent more time talking than anything else. "I know," Sarah admitted. "I'm not sure how I feel about that. Because it complicates things. Because it means my father, terrible as he is, might have accidentally done us a favor. And I hate that." Dominic set down his pen. "Sarah, you're under no obligation to hate your circumstances simply because they began unjustly. You're allowed to find peace here." "Am I?" She looked up from her book. "I'm your prisoner, Dominic, no matter how comfortable the cage. Isn't finding peace just giving up? Is that what you think you are? My prisoner, aren't I?" He rose from his desk and crossed to where she sat, moving with that supernatural grace that no longer frightened her as it once had. "Walk with me." They left the study, moving through the manor until they reached the front door. Dominic opened it, then stepped aside. "Leave," he said simply. Sarah stared at him. "What?" "Leave. Take Emma. Go wherever you wish. I won't stop you. The debt is paid as far as I'm concerned. It has been for months. But my father will never know the debt is settled unless I choose to tell him. He can spend the rest of his life wondering what became of you, or you can tell him yourself, if you prefer." Sarah's mind reeled. "You're letting us go?" "I'm telling you that you've been free to leave for some time now. I was simply waiting for you to ask." He studied her face. "But you're not going to, are you?" She should. She should take Emma and run, build a new life somewhere her father would never find them. But even as she thought it, Sarah knew the truth. She didn't want to leave. Somewhere along the way, this strange manor with its vampire inhabitants had become more home than anywhere she'd lived since Michael died. And Dominic, complicated, centuries old, carrying his guilt like armor, had become someone she trusted, someone she looked forward to seeing each day, someone whose rare smiles made her heart beat faster. "No," she whispered. "I'm not going to leave." "Why not?" The question hung between them. Sarah knew the answer, had known it for weeks now, but saying it aloud would change everything, would make real this impossible thing growing between them. "Because I want to be here," she said finally. "Not because I have to, because I choose to." Something blazed in Dominic's eyes. "Sarah, and because Emma's happy and safe, and she deserves that, and because..." She took a breath. "Because you've shown me more kindness, more genuine care than my own father ever did. Because when I'm with you, I feel like someone sees me, not just a mistake I made or the widow I became or the burden I represent." He closed the distance between them in a heartbeat. You were never a burden. Not to me. Then what am I? You're... He seemed to struggle with words. This ancient being who'd lived through centuries. You're the first person in 200 years who made me want to be better than I am. Who looks at me and sees someone worth knowing, not just something to fear. Who made me remember what it feels like to care about someone else's happiness more than my own revenge. Sarah's breath caught. Dominic. I'm in love with you. The words came out rough, almost desperate. I have been for weeks. I know I have no right. You came here as payment for a debt, and I'm the monster who collected it. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about your father, or redemption, or proving anything. It became about you. Just you. The world seemed to tilt. Sarah reached up, touching his face, so cold compared to human warmth, but solid and real beneath her fingers. I didn't think vampires could love. Neither did I. Not anymore. You proved me wrong. She should have been afraid of what this meant, of loving something that could kill her so easily. But fear was the last thing Sarah felt as she pulled him down to kiss her. His lips were cold, careful, as though he expected her to recoil. Instead, she pressed closer and felt the moment when his control cracked. He pulled her against him with desperate strength, kissing her like a man drowning who'd finally found air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Though he didn't need to breathe, Sarah realized dimly. Dominic pressed his forehead to hers. I need you to be sure, he said quietly. I'm not human, Sarah. I'll outlive you by centuries. I'll watch you age while I remain unchanged. There are aspects of my world that are dangerous, dark. I can protect you from most of it, but not all. If you choose this, choose me, you need to understand what you're accepting. I know. And she did. Sarah had spent months in this world now. She'd seen enough to understand the reality behind the romance. I'm not a foolish girl who thinks love conquers everything. I know what you are, Dominic. I've always known, and I'm choosing you anyway. His smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Then I'm the luckiest monster who ever lived. They spent the rest of the night talking, planning, navigating the impossible logistics of a relationship between human and vampire. Sarah would need to make choices about her future, whether to eventually become a vampire herself, or to live out her natural life and let Dominic face the grief of losing her. Emma would need to be told the truth, carefully and over time, as she grew old enough to understand. There would be challenges, other vampires who didn't approve, her father, if he ever discovered she'd stayed by choice rather than compulsion. The simple, daily difficulties of loving someone whose existence defied nature. But as Sarah lay in Dominic's arms at night, he didn't sleep, but held her while she did. She felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope for the future. The months that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. She and Dominic navigated their relationship with the care it deserved, building something real from the strange foundation of her arrival. Emma was told, in age-appropriate terms, that Dominic is special, and some people might not understand, but he cares for us very much. The child accepted this with the easy flexibility of youth, already devoted to the vampire, who become a father figure in her life. The coven adapted as well. Some vampires were skeptical, but none dared challenge Dominic's claim on Sarah now. Not when it was clear the feeling was mutual. Marcus was insufferably smug about having predicted it all along. Mrs. Thorne simply smiled and said she'd known from the start that Sarah belonged at Nightbourne Manor. Sarah's father never learned the truth. As far as Richard Ashford knew, his daughter and granddaughter were still in prison as payment for his debts, and would remain so indefinitely. Sarah found she could live with that particular lie. Some men didn't deserve to know that their cruelty had accidentally led to happiness. 2 years after her arrival, on a spring evening with moonlight streaming through the manor's windows, Dominic asked Sarah to marry him. The proposal was private, just the two of them in the library where they'd spent so many evenings learning each other's hearts. I can't give you a normal life, he said, holding a ring that had belonged to someone in his human past. I can't grow old with you or give you more children. I can't promise you an easy road. But I can promise that I will love you with everything I am for as long as you'll have me. Sarah took the ring, slipping it onto her finger. I don't want a normal life. I want this life. With you, with Emma, in this impossible, beautiful place we've built together. The wedding was small, held in the manor's gardens at twilight. Emma served as flower girl, solemn in her importance, and delighted by the romance of it all. The coven attended, along with a few carefully chosen human friends who'd been brought into the secret. Mrs. Thorne cried, much to everyone's surprise, including her own. And when the ceremony concluded, when Sarah found herself bound to this ancient creature who'd learned to love again through her presence, she felt no regret. Only gratitude that her father's punishment had become her salvation. "I love you," she whispered to Dominic as they danced beneath strings of lights, surrounded by vampires and humans who become family. "I love you," he replied, and she could feel the truth of it in every careful touch, every protective gesture. "You saved me, Sarah. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," she corrected. And as Emma ran past, chasing Marcus in some elaborate game, her laughter ringing through the night, Sarah knew it was true. What had begun as a father's cruel punishment had become something neither Richard Ashford nor Sarah herself could have predicted. A love that transcended the boundaries between human and vampire, a family forged not by blood but by choice. Years passed in the way they do for humans, marking Sarah with subtle lines and silver threads among her blonde hair, while Dominic remained unchanged. Emma grew from a child into a bright teenager, attending university and excelling in her studies. She knew the truth now, all of it, and had made her own peace with the supernatural world she'd been raised in. "Will you become one of them?" Emma asked her mother one evening. She was home for the holidays, sitting in the library where Sarah and Dominic still spent their evenings. "A vampire, I mean." Sarah glanced at Dominic, who'd quietly left the room to give them privacy for this conversation, though his supernatural hearing meant he could still listen if he chose. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's complicated. Because of me? Partly. If I turn, I'll outlive you by centuries. I'll have to watch you age, watch you—" Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. Emma reached for her mother's hand. "But if you don't turn, Dominic will have to watch you age and die. Either way, someone loses someone they love. Maybe the question isn't which loss is easier, but which life would make you happiest." Sometimes her daughter's wisdom startled her. "When did you get so wise?" "I had good teachers." Emma smiled. "Mama, I want you to know, whatever you choose, I support it. You gave up everything to keep me safe when grandfather sent us here. You've spent my whole life putting me first. If becoming a vampire is what you want, don't let me be the reason you don't do it." Sarah pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. "I love you so much." "I love you too, and I love Dominic. He's been more of a father to me than I ever expected to have after Dad died. You both deserve to be happy, for as long as possible." That night, Sarah found Dominic on the terrace where they'd first spoken honestly about his past. He was staring at the stars, his expression distant. "You heard?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "I did. I'm sorry you have to make this choice at all." "Dominic, look at me." When he did, Sarah took both his hands. "I've thought about this for years, about what it would mean to turn, to leave behind my humanity. I've been afraid, not of what I'd become, but of the permanence of it. Once it's done, there's no going back. I would never pressure you. I know, you've made that clear 1,000 times. But Emma's right. Either way, someone I love faces loss. And I've realized something." Sarah moved closer until they were nearly touching. "I've already left behind the woman I was when I arrived here. The frightened widow who let her father control her life because she didn't believe she had any other choice. You helped me become someone stronger, someone who makes her own decisions. Sarah, I want to turn, Dominic, not because I'm afraid of aging or death or losing you, but because I want centuries more of this life we've built. I want to see Emma's children grow up and their children. I want to be there when humanity reaches the stars. I want 1,000 more evenings in the library with you, 1,000 more nights dancing under moonlight. I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." The joy that flooded his face was worth every moment of uncertainty she'd ever felt. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything." "When?" Sarah smiled. Emma graduates in 6 months. Let's wait until then. I want to be there as I am now, to see her walk across that stage as a proud human mother. After that, she squeezes hands. After that, we begin our forever. The 6 months pass in a blur of preparations both mundane and supernatural. Emma's graduation was a joyous affair, with Sarah crying proud tears as her daughter accepted her diploma with honors. Afterward, there was a celebration at the manor with both human and vampire guests who become family over the years. "Ready, Mama?" Emma asked as the party wound down. She was leaving the next day for a summer research position across the country, an opportunity too good to pass up, and one that would give Sarah time to adjust to her new existence before Emma returned. "Ready," Sarah confirmed, holding her daughter tight. "Be safe. Call often. And remember, I know, you'll be different when I see you again, but you'll still be you. I'm not worried, Mama. I know Dominic will take care of you." Emma pulled back, eyes bright with tears. "I'm proud of you for choosing what you want instead of what you think you should want." After Emma left, the manor seemed quieter. Sarah had a week to say goodbye to daylight, to enjoy the sun one last time, to prepare mentally for the transformation. She spent it walking the grounds, memorizing the way morning dew looked on grass, how afternoon light filtered through leaves, the warmth of sunset on her skin. Dominic stayed close but gave her space to process. On the final day, he found her in the garden at dusk, having second thoughts. "No, but I'm allowed to be a little scared, aren't I?" "You'd be foolish not to be. The transformation is painful, Sarah. I won't lie to you about that. And the first weeks after are difficult. Learning to control new instincts, adjusting to heightened senses. But I'll be with you every moment. You won't face it alone." She turned to face him, this man she'd loved for years, who'd loved her back with devotion that had transformed them both. "Tell me again. Tell me what I'm becoming." "Strong. Faster than you can imagine. Your senses will sharpen until you can hear heartbeats from rooms away. See in complete darkness. You'll need blood to survive, but we've established ethical sources. Donated blood from willing humans, never taken by force. You'll stop aging, healing from almost any injury. And you'll have time, Sarah. So much time to learn, to grow, to experience everything this world has to offer. And you'll be there every step of the way, for as long as you want me. Forever, then." Dominic smiled. It was a smile she loved most. Unguarded, genuine, full of the love they'd built from impossible circumstances. Forever it is. The transformation took place in Dominic's private chambers, with Marcus and Elena standing by as witnesses and support. Sarah had read everything she could about the process, but knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. Dominic's bite was gentle, almost reverent, as he drank from her wrist. Then came his blood, bitter and cold on her tongue. The world began to blur, her human body starting to shut down as vampire blood worked through her system. The pain came gradually, then all at once, like being burned from the inside out, every cell restructuring, dying and being reborn as something new. Sarah wanted to scream, but couldn't find her voice. She felt Dominic's hand gripping hers, heard his voice murmuring reassurance, though the words were lost in the roaring in her ears. Time lost meaning. Hours or days might have passed. The pain would crest and recede like waves, each surge worse than the last. But through it all, Dominic's presence was constant, an anchor in the storm. Finally, the pain began to fade. In its place came awareness, sharp, crystalline, overwhelming. Sarah could hear things she'd never noticed before. The ancient house settling, wind moving through trees half a mile away, the heartbeats of humans in distant parts of the manor. She could smell everything, old wood and new flowers, the lingering scent of cooking from the kitchen, the unique fragrance of each person who had passed through the room in the last day. And when she opened her eyes, the world was different. Colors were more vivid, details sharper. She could see dust motes dancing in air currents, read the titles of books across the room without straining, perceive the texture of shadows. "Sarah?" Dominic's voice, and she could hear layers in it now. Concern, hope, love, all woven together in a symphony of emotion. She turned her head, So fast, the movement almost blurring, and looked at him. Really looked. With new eyes, I could see the subtle play of muscle beneath skin, the way light reflected off his eyes, the infinite detail of his features. "Hello," she whispered, and her own voice sounded different. Richer. Somehow, it worked. His laugh was relief and joy combined. "It worked. How do you feel?" Sarah took inventory. The hunger was there, a gnawing emptiness that would need to be addressed soon. But beyond that, she felt strong, powerful, alive in a way she'd never experienced as a human. "I feel—" She stood, marveling at the ease of it, the absence of any ache or fatigue. "I feel incredible." The first weeks were challenging as she'd expected. Learning to control her new strength meant broken doorknobs and shattered glasses until she adjusted. The hunger was constant at first, requiring frequent feeding to stabilize her transformation. Her senses overwhelmed her sometimes. Too much input, too many sounds and smells and sensations all at once. But Dominic guided her through it with patience born of centuries. Marcus taught her to fight, to use her new speed and strength effectively. Elena showed her how to move through the human world without drawing attention. Mrs. Thorne, unsurprised by the transformation, simply adjusted Sarah's wardrobe to account for the fact that she'd never age. By the time Emma returned from her summer research, Sarah had achieved something like equilibrium with her new nature. She waited nervously in the foyer as her daughter's car pulled up, uncertain how Emma would react to seeing her mother as a vampire for the first time. Emma stepped through the door, dropped her bags, and studied Sarah with the careful attention of a scientist examining a fascinating specimen. "Your eyes are different," she said finally. "Brighter. And you're even more beautiful than before, which hardly seems fair." Sarah laughed, relief flooding through her. "That's all? After months apart. That's your observation? Well, I could ask if you've eaten anyone I know, but Dominic assured me you're on the ethical blood diet." Emma grinned, then rushed forward to hug her mother. "You're still you. I can feel it. Just more so." "More so," Sarah repeated, testing the phrase. "I like that." Life settled into a new rhythm. Sarah discovered she had aptitude she'd never known as a human, a gift for languages that helped her master several over the next few years, a facility with music that led to her taking up the piano. She traveled with Dominic, seeing corners of the world she'd only dreamed of before. Emma pursued her career, eventually marrying a kind man who accepted his mother-in-law's unique nature with remarkable composure. When Emma's children were born, Sarah held her grandchildren with careful vampire strength, marveling at the continuation of life that her choice had allowed her to witness. Richard Ashford died without ever learning what had become of his daughter and granddaughter. Sarah attended his funeral from a distance, feeling nothing but mild pity for the man who tried to throw her away and had instead given her everything. Decades passed, then a century. Sarah watched Emma age gracefully, surrounded by love and family, living a full life before passing peacefully in her sleep at 93. The grief was immense. Losing a child was something no parent should endure, human or vampire. But Sarah had Dominic, had their coven family, had centuries of memories with her daughter to cherish. And she had time to heal, to grow, to discover new purposes. She became an advocate for ethical vampire-human relations, working to build bridges between the supernatural and mortal worlds. She and Dominic opened a sanctuary for humans who found themselves in situations similar to what hers had been. Trapped by circumstances, in need of protection and a fresh start. 200 years after her arrival at Nightbourne Manor, Sarah stood in the gardens at twilight, watching the sunset in colors her human eyes could never have perceived. Dominic joined her, as he always did, slipping his hand into hers. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Choosing this life?" Sarah thought about the question. She thought about Emma, about the great-great-great-grandchildren she'd watched grow up. She thought about the world she'd seen change, about the lives she'd touched, about the love she'd shared with the man beside her for 2 centuries. "Not for a single moment," she said truthfully. "My father thought he was punishing me, throwing me away like garbage. Instead, he gave me the greatest gift imaginable. He gave me you. He gave me a chance to become who I was always meant to be." Dominic raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with the same reverence he'd shown that first night when she'd agreed to stay. I'm the one who received the gift. You taught me that monsters could be redeemed, that love is possible even for creatures like us, that sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. We taught each other, Sarah corrected, echoing words she'd spoken at their wedding 2 centuries before. And as they stood together in the garden, immortal and in love, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She'd arrived at Nightbourne Manor as a punishment, a pawn in a game of supernatural debt. She'd been terrified, broken, expecting nothing but pain. Instead, she'd found a home, a family, a love that transcended everything she'd thought she knew about the world. Her father had tried to throw her away, but he'd actually set her free. And in freedom, Sarah had discovered that sometimes the darkest paths lead to the brightest destinations, that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, that the end of one life can be the beginning of something infinitely better. Thank you, she whispered to Dominic, to the universe, to fate itself, for all of this, for every moment. Thank you, Dominic replied, for choosing to stay, for teaching me to love again, for being my salvation. The stars began to emerge overhead, eternal lights bearing witness to an eternal love. And Sarah, who'd been given to an alpha vampire as punishment, who'd chosen to become a vampire herself out of love, smiled at the beautiful irony of it all. Her father's cruelty had led to her greatest happiness. His punishment had become her reward. His attempt to destroy her had instead transformed her into something stronger, more complete, more truly herself than she'd ever been in her human life. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the best revenge is living well, and she was living very well indeed, forever stretched before her, full of possibility and love and adventure. And she would face it all with Dominic by her side, the alpha vampire who'd become her partner, her love, her equal. The punishment had become a blessing. The prison had become a paradise. And the monster she'd feared had become the great love of her eternal life. Some debts, Sarah thought, turned out to be worth paying after all.